Hello, welcome to the SCI webcast, Managing Risk and Resilience, Identifying and Mitigating Cyber Risk. I'm joined today by Greg Crabb. Good afternoon, Greg.
Hey, how are you, Matt?
Very good. How are you?
Outstanding.
Well, Greg, we have a guest with us, Beth-Anne Bygum. Uh, Welcome, Beth-Anne.
Hello, welcome. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, and Beth-Anne, thank you for joining us. This is exciting. I'm really thrilled to have you, and we've been friends for a while, and to have you join us and talk about cyber risk and resilience, couldn't be more excited. So thank you. Before we get started, I'd love to give your background. Is that okay? I'll read a little bit of a bio. Beth-Anne Bygum is the Senior Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer at Q2, where she oversees cybersecurity, risk management, and compliance initiatives for an extensive fintech platform. With a career spanning roles at Axiom, McKesson, and Amgen, Beth-Anne brings a wealth of experience in designing and scaling resilience frameworks across industries. She's an advocate for strong cybersecurity practices, has a passion for teaching as an adjunct professor, and holds certifications in cyber resilience and business continuity. Beth-Anne's insights into risk and resilience will be invaluable for today's episode as we explore the challenges and strategies for effective risk management in today's cloud-driven world. This is going to be an exciting one, Matt.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us, Beth-Anne.
Well, thank you both for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I just hope I'm able to contain and not geek out, which I normally do.
Geeking out's okay. We're okay with it.
It's Carnegie Mellon, Beth-Anne. You can geek out.
Good.
Let's start setting up the framework. Beth-Anne, could you share how you approach defining cyber risk?
Well, I think it's an active target. The world around us is constantly changing. I mean, obviously, we lean into various frameworks that help guide the definition of risk, especially as it relates to cybersecurity. And then the use of those frameworks are significantly important because we need to ensure that industry and agencies, regulatory agencies, understand our interpretation of the definition, and how we define it, how we quantify it, how we measure it, how we are constantly determining if more investments are needed in the space. But then there's the real world definition of managing the risk, which I think is an ever evolving conversation as we start to look deeper into our supply chain ecosystem. Managing the risk today does not look like managing the risk yesterday.
Beth-Anne, can you maybe enumerate for us some of the risk factors that you feel are most important when you're thinking about this universe of risks that you're subject to?
Yeah, well, it's a very broad question, so I'm going to narrow it down with more of a maybe three lenses. One is the risk as it relates to the services that we're delivering. For us and for the world that I've been in, many of our services are products that are either connected to or hosting sensitive data. And so that definition of risk is driven by expectation of what security needs to be for those products, and then what's expected if you're part of a regulated industry, right? So I remember many years ago when I worked in the biotech sector, how you defined managing the risk from GXP regulatory expectation, and the response is similar in some cases to working in the FI sector, but there was other areas that are slightly that were different, right? Being able to demonstrate fit for use from a GMP perspective or a GCP perspective has additional expectations than the work I'm doing today. But it's also very similar, right? I remember having multiple conversations with my QC team members, my quality control team members, and quality assurance team members, and how we would have rapid rounds of conversation around what fit for use is, and did the IT teams achieve that or not achieve it, and how we're testing or not testing. So I think we always have to start with what's our purpose supporting the business? Are we managing regulated or sensitive data? Depending on what term you use, it could be restricted, confidential, sensitive. But all of those are part of how we define what is of value, and what is important to the business. So that's one lens. The second lens is if there's an attraction, right? So you remember when we were first starting off on our cybersecurity respective jobs, and the one thing you learned is like if there's nothing of value and if nobody's interested in it, there's just no risk. And so, how that definition of who's interested, why they're interested, that continues to evolve as we're watching the threat landscape change. And the last piece, and how we look at defining and managing the risk and then how we quantify it is, I heard someone said this the other day, a colleague of mine, his name is Sasha. He said something that I thought was astounding. We will never be less connected than we are today. And so that definition of my risk and my risk profile is constantly changing as we exchange with other, supply chain partners in the broader ecosystem, for sure.
Thank you. So it sounds like that scoping or that if you're worried about everything, you're worried about nothing. I think it's a really interesting observation around connectivity, right? Everyone thinks they're living at the end of history, but the truth is we'll be even more connected in the future. So thank you for offering that insight.
Yeah, it's really funny. The definition of endpoint is changing real time. I think, Greg, when we started working together a few years back, I would say data was the new endpoint. And now where we are, identities very closely associated with data. So identity, I think, is the new endpoint. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch how we interpret risk while the definition of the identity continues to change.
Yeah, fascinating, Beth-Anne, as we think about the threat landscape and what constitutes a machine identity and a human identity, I think are really something that we're going to have to look out for as practitioners. So I think you bring up a really good point there. And, where's that? This is off script a little bit. Where's that going from a future state perspective, do you think, Beth-Anne, relative to this thought process of identity as the domain of security, of resilience and security?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Historically, when we look at user access controls, identity access controls, we always lead with the identity, the human foot, right? We lead. That dance is always with the foot of, we lead with the foot around the human. I think we're probably, honestly, I think we're past it. But I think the non-human, like the workload calls, the system integrations, I think that's the foot we have to lead with now. And not that the human isn't important. I think it's very important. But I think the technologies that we have wrapped around our environments and our development, especially in any of the stacks that you may support, I think the human is going to be controlled, right? As far as being able to traverse. I think it's the fact that, listen, we've all been at this for a while, and the concept of being able to maintain your CMDB and your architecture and the architecture drawing, those are so essential at this point in time. Greg, we've had this conversation a couple times. It's like we're at a place where architecture has to retain its rightful space, right? It has to be lead in that dance. And when you design things, and I had a meeting with our architecture teams this morning, and I was just like, okay, let's talk about our standards. How, what do we need to start driving? And I think it's the workload calls, it's the non-human identities that are going to just really be the ones to watch as we move forward.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And
And then, sorry, I promised I wasn't going to geek out, but I'm just, I can't help myself. But, I think we're at a point in time where we probably are going to be managing four identities, right? We've got system calls, we have your traditional physical identity, you have your traditional digital identity, social security numbers, then you've got your avatar identity, which is going to
yeah,
have decision-making capabilities, so
That's
fascinating.
yeah, it's really interesting that there's a dimensionality to identity that didn't exist
yeah.
in the recent past. And a little off script again, but Beth Ann, how should organizations maybe reconsider the way that they frame the question of assets? You've referred a few times to understanding the assets of the organization. If we have this dimensionality that we didn't in the past with identity, how does that inform how we should tackle this challenge?
Well, I think the definition of asset and then what's of value as an asset is going to evolve. And we're seeing that real time with the introduction of new capabilities wrapped around data, wrapped around identities through generative AI and larger scale solutions that are able to take the data and um, introduce new insights that we potentially hadn't had time to. I was listening to an article or reading an article or it was a podcast, and we were talking about like the state and use of AI right now is really like rapidly processing algorithms, and at some point we will see true artificial intelligence. But I think what we define and how we define asset and then a valuable asset is about to change because there will be new assets that are very important to our ecosystem that we've not necessarily either entertained in the past or we had classified them in a different category from our traditional systems and system engineering definitions. How we trained on systems. I'm much older than I look here. So when I went through school, how we were trained on systems and what was defined as critical components of the systems, that's gonna be totally different. So I think that what falls into that asset category and what's considered and classified as value, I think we have to start thinking outside of the box because we may potentially miss or misclassify important aspects of our computing environment because we're using traditional definitions of asset, of value, of identity. And we are surpassing that real time every day as we're watching the next generation compute take its place. We need to start thinking outside of the box because the new technology that we're using now is definitely much more nimble than the way we used to look at these things.
Yeah, this goes right in line with some conversations I was having earlier this week around how AI is becoming the new organizational platform.
Yeah.
And, as we think about organizations struggling to deal with their traditional infrastructure of computers and vulnerabilities or their application development lifecycle from a DevSecOps perspective. Now we've got this whole new era of AI SecOps needs that we're going to have to be accounting for. I think you're leading us right into this. So, what tools and frameworks do you find most useful to managing your risk now? And since we're so forward-looking here in this conversation, where is that going?
Yeah. I'm going to answer the question primarily with the cyber risk lens versus enterprise risk lens, because that starts heading in a totally different direction because you're quantifying so many different components to enterprise risk. Over the years, I've had the privilege of responding to multiple audits and defining and demonstrating what our risk appetite was or is, our risk posture, how we were addressing operating in a hybrid environment. And honestly, these frameworks are really they overpronate to the governance side of a cyber program versus the hygiene side. And again, I was in a conversation the other day, and the person was talking about most of the times the frameworks are double clicking on what you completed, how you completed it. Do you have this program? Is it comprehensive? And not necessarily the outcome of the program, which is where we are getting evaluated, where we are being measured when we look at the most recently issued fines and different concerns that the regulatory agencies are asking technology, tech companies and any publicly traded companies to really start leaning in. And so out of all of the different frameworks, which was surprising to me, the one sort of framework, certification framework based was really the TISAX model, which is an ISO-based framework, but it's a blend. It's used in the automotive industry, but I really feel as though it is the one certifying framework that truly leans into secure software development, data security in a way that is nascent to where we are today. Like it's really leaning into if you're managing your vulnerabilities, your code health, the weaknesses in your configuration, and then how you're interpreting that from a data security, data and data protection perspective. Now, it could also be that the other certifying frameworks and risk assessment processes so that do that as well as just maybe the auditing firms, but we're not going to talk about that. I really have an appreciation for that particular certification framework solution. But to your second part of your question, Greg, which is what is it going to look like as we move forward and lean forward? I think we have yet to see that occur, because when we start to unpack what's in front of us with generative AI capabilities and really more of this advanced analytics solutions that are calculating outcomes and learning from the outcomes as it's calculating, so self-learning, self-advancing, the true essence there is being able to determine, just like what we always practice in a GXP environment, is the fit for use. So when did the algorithm change, and was I able to determine that point in time and evidence that back, especially if that algorithm is making decisions on behalf of the business and or solutions. And that is a level of monitoring and testing that I think sometimes core solutions and frameworks are really not designed for that yet. But we will see. We will see for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you, Beth-Anne. I think that, NIST has attempted to do something good with the AI risk management framework. However, I don't think that it's tactical enough for practitioners to really apply in their organizations. And, as we think about trustworthy AI, ethics, bias, I think that there are some components of AI risk management that we as practitioners and those of us that are helping to define the future, I think really need to take a step back and try to figure out how we manage those risks.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it was May of 2017 when Executive Order 13800 was issued. And the purpose was to ensure that government agencies started to level up their investment into lifecycle management, tech stack, deprecated assets. And the reality is that executive order was a telltale sign to the rest of us, to the publicly traded companies as well. Start making the change. This is no longer a business decision. It's now a risk decision. Start determining how you're going to migrate off of migrate your stacks, keep your lifecycle management practices current, and start to really head in that direction. Then the next year we had CISA was instantiated in 17, yeah. And then I think it was May 2019 or 18 when Moody's was the first to issue a credit rating change for a company that was impacted by a major cybersecurity. So it's like we had these telltale signs all along. It just, we weren't necessarily connecting the dots. And we're exactly in that vortex. We're in that space right now, right? We've got this change that's coming, and we're sort of like, well, why is this happening? Well, it's happening.
Well, Beth-Anne, just to build on that, if I could, I'm thinking about a specific approach to risk management that is, often referenced in the financial services industry, and that's the FAIR methodology. So, the world's awash in risk management methodologies. We have, the CERT Octave method here at CMU, and there's many ways to do this, right? And you don't have to just pick one, but thoughts about those methods like FAIR that are predicated on likelihood as we go into this brave new world of tech.
It's interesting that you sort of phrase that question. This year, with our annual business impact assessment or continuity plans, I typically like to sit down and gather information from smarter people around me to sort of understand, like, how am I quantifying the likelihood? And so we had some time. We sat with FEMA, we sat with Texas State Office of Risk Management, and sat with a couple of. And it was interesting. In every one of those meetings, the concept was like, we need to start looking at least likely to happen, most impactful. And I think we're in that position. So I think methodologies such as FAIR and capabilities that allow us to start quantifying are really important because most of our risk decision-making models, especially as we dovetail security risk discussions into the broader enterprise risk framework to help management assess the posture and residual risk, I think those are important. But I also, to your point, Matthew, I think that we're at a point in time where we have to start quantifying the least likely to happen, most impactful, because of where we are in entering a new world of technical encounters that we've not had before. And so when you start to unpack, like I said earlier, us not necessarily ever existing in a silo, will always be interconnected. The blast radius of some of these relationships is something that, we, being able to quantify that easily is I don't know if we ever have built that out yet. So I think there's more to come, but it doesn't negate the importance of the tools as they are today, for sure.
But Beth-Anne, a question then. We've described a growing complexity, not only in the risks that we face, but the underlying technology stack. In your experience, how do we best communicate these overtly technical and complicated and sometimes fluid things related to risk to executive audiences that may be less conversant in the tech?
Yeah, well, it's definitely a journey, and making sure that journey has regular touch points is definitely the first point of setting. If it's a relationship that you own directly within your organization or your company, making sure that those touch points start off with core basic boot camp kinds of conversations. This is what's important to the company. Here's where we are from a risk posture. Here's how we're advancing our risk posture. Here are some concerns that require additional investments. I mean, it's an ever evolving conversation that has to be maintained. But I think the first thing that we have to do is demystify for our leaders what it is that we're battling, why it's important right now, their role in that risk, what we need from them. And just having those candid, honest conversations. And I think what's also important is, as we're having those conversations, we're not just asking them or informing them or educating them on the risk and their role in the risk for the organization, but it's also for their own personal lives. So this is not something where the risk stops, at work and you're heading home. I think we have to look at the relationship between ourselves as risk executives with our leaders and use this for a time of education, both for the roles that they have to maintain at the office and then at home. Now, a coupled with that, we also have to be able to set expectation and clearly articulate with our leaders what they should expect from a communication and an escalation during those times when we are managing concerns that may head more into major crisis. And so again, we use this as an education. We are helping them understand. And I think if you weave in how to to manage it within their home lives, I think that creates some additional insight that they find meaningful and that they are very grateful to receive.
Yeah, I think putting things in the context of what people already understand and bringing it into the work environment, I think is extremely important. And you've served in a lot of product companies, Beth-Anne, and customer is always at the forefront. What strategies have you found effective in building understanding and urgency around resilience for the leadership team? Because the products always have to be up, right?
So I want to sort of take that question and break it into two answers. One is, the interaction that we have with our customers. When we take a look at the communication expectations and you lay the regulatory requirements on top of that, it's actually changed with our incident response program. We've adjusted that. So we are communicating earlier and being able to provide as much transparency to the customers, either as it relates to the data, the services, or the products. And with some of the organizations that we're supporting, some of them have reporting requirements within 24 hours. So our internal processes, we have time gated that within 5 hours, we start, professional communication that goes to, general counsel. I think when we're talking about a crisis and we're talking about communications that are important, you have to surround yourself with your team. And that's going to be your general counsel. It's going to be external counsel, your liability, your insurance firms, and they're going to guide you through those communication practices when you're at a threshold of escalation and or crisis. Prior to being in an incident or something that's critical like that, it's that constant interaction with your customers around your products and your availability when it's not, we're not in the middle of an incident. We're not in the middle of an investigation. So having that trust and building that trust off hours, meaning, non-critical time is really important before you walk into a crisis.
Yeah, that's fascinating, Beth-Anne, especially with the 8K filing requirements that companies are that you're serving now have to report for materiality purposes. And, that's, we're playing a different game than we were just 2 years ago.
Exactly.
And I totally appreciate that challenge. Transition back to your software development. I mean, I know you and I have spent a lot of time talking about secure coding practices and how should we be thinking about secure coding practices and their integration with risk management in this time in 2024?
We've been around for I got to talk to myself. I've been around for a long time, and I think the conversation around DevSecOps and identify the weaknesses and the vulnerabilities or the code defects earlier, that's still salient, right? It's still important. It's a practice. It's a behavior that we are constantly working with teams. Working with the teams. So that's always something that we always want to reinforce. And I think, when you get it right, it's just super sweet. It's like a really good sandwich. No, it's like a really good, execution of that. But I think the target's changing. And what I mean by target is, the fact that we now have the ability to write and develop using not just open source code, but open source code that's written for us using prompt engineering, which may include some backdoor capabilities, which then creates the injection of poisoning, so like for our teams, just being able to take a step back and understand what does testing look like? What does fit for use look like? What does resilient code development look like? What is testing for weakness looks like? And then including with that tools that are able to help us monitor, for, solutions that may interface with generative AI capabilities on the back end of the hosted solution. Is there any, potential poisoning being injected through a prompt? So we have invested in, we constantly are investing in new technology. The actors are not having architecture debate meetings. They just launch what they are going to launch. And so being able to move at the speed of the attack is something that's always in front of us.
But then, question if I may then. So
yeah.
The role of threat modeling in your security development.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm curious about how you're seeing that evolve. And then another question to tee up here related to secure coding. I'm wondering how the use of memory safe or memory safer languages fits into the way you look at the resilience of your code base.
Mm-hmm. So definitely the change in threat modeling, obviously, because the way the threats are launching and the campaigns are looking much different, the way that they're able to be injected. Some of them are traditional because as human beings, we are constantly traditional. Don't click on that little cat, little kitty. But the ability to leverage weaknesses across an ecosystem are just expedited. And so the threat modeling, obviously traditional approaches of making sure they're integrated into the use cases and the testing cycles, but then also looking at more rapid capabilities like breach and attack simulation capabilities and more rapid constant testing to determine if the code is maintaining its resilience and its posture. So I think that's why I was saying it's ever in front of us, because we are defending at code, right? The other day I was having a conversation around policies, and I was talking like the policies and the controls are going to be like, we're not writing manual controls anymore. This is all automated. We are defending at the code level. So yeah, I think it's going to be ever in front of us.
I think you're bringing up a great point relative to risk management at the scale that software development organizations have to play at. And our cloud is evolving, right? The traditional cloud is becoming the AI platform for your organization. And how should we be thinking about risk management at this kind of scale?
Yeah. It's interesting. I think when we talk to our security engineers and our professionals in this space, and now our developers and engineers, they don't see themselves as risk professionals, right? They don't see themselves as, our engineering team members, potentially view importance of security as part of their day-to-day responsibilities. But I don't think they necessarily see themselves as risk executives, and they are, like we all are. And I have, outside of the active conversations, Greg, that you and I have had, I've had the honor of sitting with some really seasoned security, product security executives. A friend of mine named Eric is one of them, and I have to say that we need to be more nimble. When we think about our engineering practice and what we learn in school, we are typically trained and developed in disciplines that are somewhat siloed. And we establish a competency that is historic in nature. And the attacks and the areas of weaknesses and where those can be injected now are not siloed, they're lateral. You don't have to have the same type of core skill to be able to develop. You're just going into the computer and asking. But if you're asking the prompt without actually understanding the discipline of the engineering practice, you don't necessarily know what's being delivered to you from the health of the code and the integrity of how it's going to execute upstream and downstream. And I've been having a very active conversation on a number of colleagues in this particular space around we are able to almost disconnect the thought process, the education around the work that I'm doing. I rely on the prompt to tell me, but then I'm not necessarily disciplined enough. My mind doesn't understand the result that I receive because I don't have that discipline. The domain is not what I learned. I don't have to learn the domain of coding or whatever anymore. And so there's this disconnect. My concern is that potentially as we look at risk decisions and how we define risk in the future, because we're starting to disconnect the thought process around how it's executed versus the outcome of the execution, potentially we're going to miss some things because how the whole secret sauce in the middle, I'm no longer necessarily learning that. I had the privilege of teaching some high school, part of a program that's hosted from the University of Arkansas for U.S.-based high school teachers that are designing their cybersecurity curriculum. And it was amazing to hear them talk about some of their concerns with trying to educate the Board of Education. And it's not about necessarily copying a research paper versus developing these skills in order for our country to be competitive in the future.
I think as we drive forward here, how do we think about how does a team win in integrating risk management and resilience into their practice? What's win-win for risk, security, resilience, and on the other side, organizational business objectives?
Yeah. I've been using the analogy of a Peloton recently because how the teams work together to create speed, to create readiness for the next climb. You're constantly working with each other side by side. And then you're also understanding your role as the team is climbing. Okay, if I'm sprinting to create speed for the person behind me, when it's time for me to drop back, I drop back gracefully, let them come up. And we have to really start to understand the power of the Peloton because, and again, sometimes this goes against how we were trained. We were trained in silos. We were trained in the discipline of certain engineering practices. And that's just not how the world is starting to work. And that goes back to my point earlier around we are all part of the risk ecosystem. And so if you're not understanding how are you contributing to risk? Did you just compound more risk for the organization because you didn't, focus on a certain kind of testing? There is no rush to get results out anymore. And the most important thing is, I had a colleague and a sponsor of mine who would always say to me, security is an enabler of a frictionless ecosystem. And if we put that in practice and embed our security deeper into the user experience, which is really the start of when you start to look at the unraveling of potential security controls, sometimes we're doing it more for the benefit of the experience. And I don't think we should do that anymore, right? I think we need to integrate security will create a better experience because our customers are wanting to have more trust, more confirmation as we move into a corner of technology that we've never experienced before.
Beth-Anne, a question about that. You've described the interconnectedness of things, right? And one of the blind spots or under-addressed elements of resilience that I see is we often think and manage in terms of systems, but it's truly a system of systems question. And you know, and I know, and Greg knows from our exposure to these engineering disciplines that systems of systems exhibit a completely different set of attributes in a given system. So thoughts about how we should conduct risk reasoning in these highly layered systems of systems.
Yes, yeah. Matthew, that's an amazing discussion that I am going to noodle on even post this conversation. And I will use an analogy to answer your question. When we talk about not necessarily ever being less independent on each other than we are today, that is more than just how we conduct a third-party risk assessment. It is, to your point, this is, the interconnected nature of the systems and the dependencies on the system. It is truly how is the data passing through that connected ecosystem? When we started to respond to CCPA requirements of, if you're processing sensitive data and did that approval traverse downstream to, the firm that may be hosting or processing the data, it's a very similar concept. If I have, a SaaS solution or a partner that's connected into the ecosystem, and then there's a chain of custody around the data, how is that passing through the ecosystem? How is that chain of custody or the approval passing through? And the more we connect, the more meaningful it is to not just maintain the security around the data, but then transfer the controls. We don't test like company to company to company. We all have different definitions around pen tests, around SDLC testing, around so this is a very advanced new world that we're walking into, and I believe that we have the wherewithal to design it with very smart people such as yourselves, but I think we have to just be intentional about it. We've been talking about it.
Yeah, it's going to take thought leaders like you, Beth-Anne, to help us construct things that can be readily fielded to help solve this problem.
Well, I'm super excited to contribute to the body of work. When I teach the master's class, I always say, when you're writing your research paper, you're contributing to a school of thought. This is not your undergrad research paper. This is your to further the thought process. So it's exciting to be here.
Let's start to close it down and look ahead.
Yeah.
You've looked ahead quite a bit with us, quite frankly, already. But what do you see the biggest challenges in cyber risk and resilience for organizations, maybe in the financial services sector?
I think we have to. The biggest risk is not giving ourselves time to prepare for the risk. I had a professor who used to say, undergrad, you get once in life to prepare and then you're on. You get once in life to prepare and then you're on. We are in the preparation window right now, but we're so busy. We're so task saturated. We are so overwhelmed, and we need to make sure we're giving ourselves time to prepare. The people that stop and prepare will be ready for the next wave. And the next wave will be here faster than what we think. It's already here. And so as a security professional, challenging my team, like I said, this year I said at Target, I want 26% of any paper-based work out into an LLM. I want it processing. I want you to understand what that looks like. I want you to develop it. I want you to be hands-on keyboard, right? We have to force ourselves to be, I think we have to get back to being comfortable of being uncomfortable, right? We've got to force ourselves at disruption so that we're ready for what's ahead of us.
Beth-Anne, Greg and I have named this series, right? Security isn't the goal, because security is something we've aspired to, but it's not actually an attainable goal. What we're looking for is resilience. So maybe thoughts or insights for leaders that are making that transition from thinking about information security or cybersecurity to resilience or operational resilience.
Yeah, Matthew, I think that's a fantastic shift in thought process. One, because our purpose of existing as security professionals is to maintain resilience. And second is when we look at the CIA, the triad, it's the resilience of those three components are going to be pressure tested more with the onslaught of deep fakes, with the inability to confirm identity, I mean, it's just a massive amount of change and like all of the signals that we've built our security programs around. A lot of them are going to come under attack because the technology is changing, right? The different signals that we rely on. And so resilience is key. And that's why we have to start asking ourselves questions that we've never asked before, because resilience only occurs under pressure. You have to go through it to see it to become resilient versus, well, I was going to say wish upon a star, but, resilience comes through the pressure of being able to look at things quite differently. And we're in that window right now.
Organizations need to both manage conditions and consequences. I think that's the key to
exactly.
I'm proffer that thought. That is the key, I think, to understanding this balance that sometimes isn't very deliberately discussed.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Matthew. It's and then allowing ourselves to think outside of the box. It's like getting ready to step on a Star Wars kind of, or Star Trek. Like one of the vehicles that we always used to watch on TV is going to be in front of us, and the mindset that you have to be able to be ready to adopt a new thought process means you have to stop thinking the way you thought in the past and be okay with being prepared to think outside of the box.
Yeah, Beth-Anne, great kind of closing comment there relative to pressure. And, we're grateful for you to share all of the experiences that you've had under pressure to be able to help our community really understand where we need to be playing today. So thank you for taking the time to spend with us and really helping our community level up from a security and resilience perspective. And, like Matt says, we're under the thesis right now that security isn't the goal, and we really need to, as organizations, drive to resilience.
Yes,
So,
yes. Well, I'm celebrating you both. Thanks for having me today. I appreciate the conversation.
Thank you so much, Beth-Anne.